Hello and welcome back. I am continuing a series today on the Feywild. I'm doing something a little different though. This week I'm going to talk about a few potential Feywild encounters you could have in the Feywild or the material plane, since things tend to bleed over, and I'm going to focus specifically on medieval literature. Other videos in this series have focused on specific characters, NPCs, races, and I thought it'd be nice to sort of take a pause from that because I'm also very busy right now. Yeah, I didn't really have time to do research this week, which is how a lot of this semester will go. It's my final one, but luckily I'm in my Master's of English, and that means I have literature to pull from. But first, we need to do Idea of the Week, which is just a little segment I've implemented because y'all leave so many good ideas on my videos, especially last week's was really great. And I like to highlight a comment that I felt had a particularly good idea. The comments I wanted to highlight this week specifically focused on the way that the Lachey are pretty overpowered, how if they listen to someone speak for a few moments, they can just know that being's language even if they've never heard it before, and they have certain abilities that just it's a lot. Watch the video to find out more. But they recommended maybe having the Lachey and these powers and these abilities be temporary depending on who they're with. The Lachey might not need to remember a language they hear once, but knowing that they only know it while they're in conversation with the person and then completely losing that knowledge once that person or being is gone can add a sense of futility to their race. Maybe a struggle that, you know, they could use a struggle. I seriously love reading about the ideas that you guys have, so if you too want to become Idea of the Week or just, you know, interact with the community, comment below on this video any ideas you have about certain Feywild encounters that you've implemented or ways to expand on mine. Hot tip, if you want to feel like you're drinking a potion, juice in a martini glass. The first text I'm pulling from today is Perceval, or The Story of the Grail by Chrétien de Troyes. I still don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think I'm at least close. For those of you unfamiliar with the text in general, Perceval is the protagonist of the story. He begins not knowing anything about chivalry or Arthur's court or knighthood because that's what his dad and his brothers used to do until it killed them, and so his mom has kept him very sheltered. He meets some knights in the woods one day, is inspired, and wants to go be a knight. Perceval is extraordinarily dense. He doesn't quite understand a lot of the rules he's told. He doesn't quite get chivalry, and so we watch him try and learn and grow and definitely fail a lot. And he eventually sets out on the quest for the Holy Grail, the unattainable Grail. For those of you who have seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, that movie is inspired by this book. And a little fun fact, the reason that it has such a weird ending and they never actually get the Grail is because neither does Perceval. It's not because the Grail was necessarily intended to be unattainable, it's because Chrétien died. That's not funny. It's really sad because it's a great text and a lot of people have tried to finish it basically like fan fiction stuff where they, you know, round out the story and write their own ending, but yeah, the book was never finished. One more thing I want to say is that I am going to sort of present these ideas and these encounters in the text, but how you would implement it in your specific campaign would just vary so much that I'm not going to get too specific about how to adapt it. So if you end up wanting to use any of these, tell me what you're gonna do with it. Let a girl know. The first encounter I want to recommend is the Maiden in the tent. Early in his travels, Perceval comes across a beautiful tent by a stream, and I'll read you a brief description of it. He saw its beauty was extreme, for one part of the tent was red, the other trimmed with golden thread, with a gilt eagle at the summit. The bright red sunbeams glanced off from it and lit the field, so the entire field glittered in the brilliant fire the eagle in the tent reflected. This tent is also a reflection of Marie de France's Lanval, where Lanval, the hero, comes across a beautiful tent full of more wealth than could ever be imagined. In Lanval, the woman in the tent is an actual fairy, the medieval version. She's extraordinarily beautiful, and she says that she has come all this way to find Lanval, that she loves him and she wants to be with him, but he can't tell anyone about her. She's going to give him all the money he could want, all of her love, but if he tells anyone that she exists, the relationship will end and he will never hear from her again. You can imagine what the conflict ends up being in that book. But the main thing about this tent is that it's extraordinarily gorgeous and rich and vivid. In Perceval, the woman in the tent isn't a fairy. She's just a very beautiful maiden who is traveling with another knight who just happens to be away from the tent at that time. Here's my personal idea for how that could be implemented or used in a campaign. A party could come across a very rich, beautiful, red, gilded with gold, topped with a shining eagle tent. Just a random one in the middle of nowhere, probably by a stream. Streams in the medieval era sort of represented like those borders between the real and the fairyland, anything to do with water and twilight, of course. They come across this tent and a gorgeous, beautiful woman is inside, and she immediately offers them whatever they would like. She doesn't necessarily pledge her love, but she says, I will give you whatever it is that you seek from me. So what's the catch? Because it's the Feywild. There's going to be a catch. This is where my idea sort of branches off into two. One of my ideas is that this is actually Verinestra. I talked about her in a previous video. She is the Archfey daughter of Oberon and Titania, and she is the Archfey of beauty and the natural world. She's a staunch protector of nature and beautiful lands, and she could be just trying to help them. She could be testing them. She could be entertaining herself. Maybe she just wants to have a little fun. On the flip side, maybe this beautiful woman is actually a hag in disguise. Depending on how the rules in your Feywild works, maybe she can lie and say, oh, I don't require anything in return, and they can't really take her word for it because the rule of reciprocity just demands that they must give something in return. Or maybe she does ask a favor of them and it seems harmless, and they think that maybe they could trust her because this is a beautiful and seemingly very nice woman. There's a number of ways that could go, so I don't know. Tell me what you think. The next encounter I want to pull from Perceval is from the chapter called The Red Knight. Perceval is seeking out King Arthur at his castle, or one of them, because he wants King Arthur to knight him. Again, he knows nothing about knighthood and has done absolutely no training at all. Maybe you could have a Perceval in your campaign. But as he draws close to the king's castle, this is what he sees. Then he beheld a warrior in arms who held a gold cup coming through the gates. In his left hand, he held his great long lance, his shield and bridle, and he held the cup in his right hand. The knight was armed and helmeted in handsome arms of scarlet red, becoming and entirely new. The youth admired his weapons too. The knight stops Perceval and asks him where he's going. Perceval tells him to King Arthur to be knighted, and this is how the Red Knight responds. Inform the coward king if he will not hold his domain from me and be my vassal to surrender or send someone as its defender, for I proclaim his lands are mine. Let him believe you by this sign. Right to his face, I have snatched up and carried off his golden cup filled with wine. AKA, the Red Knight walked in, told King Arthur to his face, these lands are mine, either send someone to defend it or surrender, and then took the cup out of Arthur's hands and is now waiting outside his castle. Perceval really wants this guy's clothes and armor and helmet, so of course he ends up trying to just tell the Red Knight, okay, whatever, give me your stuff. The Red Knight tells him no, and Perceval somehow manages to kill him. But how could a moment like this be translated to a campaign? Well, perhaps your party is on the way to a kingdom. They come across one knight or one cleric or one paladin or one what have you, big guy in big armor looking very impressive, who has claimed these lands as his own. The party would probably ask, okay, what claim do you have? Why are you claiming it? Try and sort of figure out if they should help this guy. And once again, you would have a few options here. Maybe this guy's a total joke. He's beefy and he's impressive, but he's not really worth the party's time. Or maybe he has a rightful claim to the throne, or he would just be a better ruler and is, kind of going about it in a weird way. Or again, if this is the Feywild, it could be a test. If they agree to help this knight, maybe the knight was placed here by the ruler or the archfey of this land to see if anyone would try and help him sort of usurp the ruler. If the party says they'll help the knight, maybe they no longer become welcome in the lands or get straight up attacked for saying that they would do such a thing. It's the Feywild. You gotta keep them on their toes. Before I move on to the other text, I have one more idea for Perceval that's a bit more vague, and it has to do with the Grail. I'll finish reading this book tomorrow, actually, so maybe I'll come up with some more ideas. Let me know if you want a part 2 to this. But like I said, the Grail is supposed to be unattainable. Maybe there's an item in the Feywild. Maybe it's a literal Grail that is notorious for being sought after. Maybe the party comes across a group of people in search of the Grail. Maybe they've just heard rumors of it, or maybe they're assigned to go find it. At that point, you'd have to decide, is the Grail something that can be found? What does it do? Maybe it's unattainable because an extremely powerful being in the Feywild, like an Archfey, especially of the Unseelie Court, already has it. My first semester of grad school, I took a class on death in literature and how different cultures have depicted death in their writing throughout the years. So of course we had some medieval era stuff, and of course it's weird, and it has Christian undertones, but I think it could translate really well to sort of a cleric situation. I'll just show you. I feel like it goes without saying, but I am reading translations of all of this. I am just not very good at Middle English. For the next one I want to talk about is a disputation or a dispute between the body and the worms. The narrator in this one is walking through a land that has recently been affected by a plague, and he of course comes across a church. This is what he finds. Beside me, I saw a tomb or sepulchre that seemed to be freshly adorned and raised, just newly made by my conjecture, with sundry arms thereon emblazed. Upon the epitaph I boldly gazed. Gilt gold on copper gleamed each line, with a woman's figure, fresh and fine. It becomes clear that in life, this woman had money. She was wealthy, she was respected, she was protected. Our narrator then hears a dialogue happening between her and the worms that are eating her body. The woman is essentially trying to tell the worms, I was important, you should not be eating me, knights are going to come and kill you for doing this to me. And the worms are basically saying, no, they're not, and it doesn't matter when you're dead. It's a fun time. But how to translate it to D&D? A party could come across a church or a chapel, and especially if you want to stick with the theme of the beautiful woman arguing that she should be alive or treated well or something like that, maybe the Church of Eranestra again would be a good place to start. I like the idea of this being an abandoned church, and when they enter, they might see a single tomb. They might find a space within the church or chapel that has multiple tombs within it. And maybe there's no dialogue. Perhaps they do hear the worms in the body arguing something. That would be really fun. But I also like the idea of them walking into this space, finding beautiful, gorgeous tombs with bodies of people who look like they were extraordinarily wealthy with no context. Maybe these bodies did die from some sort of plague or sickness that was going around this community. Maybe that's why the chapel is now abandoned. If so, what was the plague? What happened here? You could do a lot of fun stuff and do some weird sicknesses, particularly since it is the Feywild. And maybe, just because it would be a good time, they get to listen in on a little argument between a body and a bunch of worms trying to eat it. Can they help? Can they fix that? Or is it just something that they would get to witness? It's up to you. The next text is called Saint Erkenwald. In this one, the saint is traveling to different lands, and he comes across a place where a body has been uncovered. Once again, this body is just adorned in fabulous wealth. But here's the trick. This body is unrecognizable. Clearly it belonged to someone extremely important, maybe a king even. And the manner of the clothes say that this person died centuries ago, from beyond the time that anyone could possibly remember. And yet his body is perfectly preserved. In the text itself, what happens is Saint Erkenwald ends up praying that God would make the body be able to speak so they can ask questions of it. And when God eventually actually does that, the body wakes up, tells its story, and you learn that though this person did wonderful deeds in life, he was not a Christian and therefore, was sort of preserved but could never actually make it into heaven, a sort of in-between state. And then by the end of the conversation, he becomes a Christian and the body decomposes at an unnatural rate. The end. But this is D&D, so how are we going to change that up? This is another church chapel setting, but of course the party could find a perfectly preserved body in a lot of weird places. Maybe just laying out in the middle of a field, like a tomb out in a field with a forest surrounding it. I think that would be really cool. Or maybe a tomb inlaid in the side of a mountain that's clearly extremely old that they're able to crack open. We also have a solution for having a perfectly preserved body, the gentle repose spell. Maybe someone's been maintaining the repose and maybe there's just some weird magic that's keeping it perfectly preserved. If the party can speak with the dead or do anything like that, they could of course try to have an actual conversation and ask questions of this body. Maybe they were actually seeking this body, heard of it, and within the tomb is some sort of special artifact. When they take it off the body, maybe it wakes up. Maybe the party just wants to do a little grave robbing and don't realize that the treasures on this person's body are cursed and that is what has kept the body preserved all these years. Or maybe, of course, they are just seeing something weird in the Feywild. It's not my favorite option, but I think it's fun to throw those in. Stuff that seems like it probably should matter, but maybe it's just random chaos. I really enjoyed doing this style of video, and it was also a lot easier to prep for since this is work that I'm actively working with in other parts of my life. I'm a story gal. I'm a literature gal. So if you want to see a part 2 or other similar videos to this, let me know. And I also want to know what you think about these encounters specifically, how you might use them, how you might tweak them. Basically, I hope this was helpful to you. If it was, like, subscribe, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye-bye.